I need to file a report about someone. What exactly happened? A few days ago, I ended a relationship with a man who has since threatened my life. He told me he would kill me, that it would be something people would remember for years. He said he didn't care if it took him 20 years to follow through, but I care. I don't want the man who's hurt my family to be free on the streets for the next 20 years. On December 27, 2010, 13-year-old Hailey Dunn was supposed to be heading to a sleepover at her best friend's house. But she never arrived. In fact, she hadn't even told her friend she was coming. If you're familiar with true crime, you've probably heard this case. It became a high-profile investigation, one that quickly outgrew the small police department of Colorado City, Texas, and brought in both the Texas Rangers and the FBI. Yet, despite naming a suspect, the case dragged on for more than a decade, before going cold again. Now, new information is surfacing. Evidence once locked away in sealed files or overlooked in the early days is being brought back into the light. But before we get to those revelations, we need to go back to the beginning. It was the day after Christmas in Colorado City, a town of fewer than 4,000 residents where everyone knows everyone. Hailey, full of energy and barely a teenager, had just celebrated the holiday. She showed off her new iPod, played sports, and split her time between her mother's house and her father's just across the street. She loved glitter and girly things, but she was also a tomboy who could hold her own. Hailey lived with her mother, Billie Jean Dunn, her older brother David, and her mother's boyfriend, Sean Adkins. Her parents had separated years earlier, but Hailey remained close with her dad, Clint. On the surface, theirs looked like a fairly ordinary home. But the morning of December 27th changed everything. Billie Jean said goodbye to her daughter before leaving for a 12-hour shift, leaving Hailey asleep in her bed. Sean claimed he left even earlier, around 5:30 a.m., heading to work, though he quit his job minutes after arriving. He told investigators he drove to his mother's home in Big Spring, where he stayed for most of the day. But later, phone records suggested otherwise. By 2:30 p.m., a strange text was sent from Hailey's phone to a friend. It read only one word, YWD, short for "What are you doing?" The friend never replied. That message would be the last sign of life from Hailey Dunn. When Billie returned home that evening and discovered her daughter wasn't there, she didn't panic immediately. Sean told her Hailey had gone to her dad's and was staying over at a friend's house, Mary Beth. But the story didn't add up. Clint hadn't seen Hailey all day, and when Billie called Mary Beth's family, they confirmed Hailey had never planned to stay over. Even more unsettling, her cell phone, purse, and favorite belongings were still in her room. The things she always took with her, even for a simple sleepover. Billie started knocking on doors, asking neighbors if they'd seen Hailey walking. No one had. The next day, she finally filed a missing persons report. At first, authorities labeled Hailey a runaway, a misstep that slowed down the investigation. But the community wouldn't sit idle. Neighbors and volunteers searched fields, alleys, and abandoned lots. Clint scoured dumpsters, followed leads, and refused to give up. Meanwhile, Sean's behavior drew suspicion. He didn't search, didn't hand out flyers, and seemed detached. Billie avoided wooded areas, saying she couldn't bear the thought of searching for her daughter's body. Still, just 4 days after Hailey vanished, Billie and Sean threw a New Year's Eve party, a decision that outraged Clint. By January 4th, the case had escalated. The Texas Rangers and FBI joined the search, and Hailey's smiling face appeared on billboards across Texas highways. The case hit national television when Billie appeared on the Nancy Grace Show, where her demeanor and Nancy's relentless questioning only fueled suspicion. Attention quickly turned to Sean. He gave interviews of his own, insisting he loved Hailey and would never hurt her. But his words raised more questions than answers. As he put it, "It hurts to be accused. I loved Hailey with all my heart. She loved me too. I'd never hurt that little girl." But with the inconsistencies in his story and the strange decisions made by Billie in those critical early days, investigators and the public began to wonder, what really happened to Hailey Dunn. The investigation into Hailey Dunn's disappearance quickly turned into a national spectacle. While the search efforts intensified, so did the scrutiny of those closest to her. Detectives zeroed in on Sean Adkins. His shifting alibis and questionable behavior raised red flags. He originally told investigators he'd gone straight to his mother's house in Big Spring after leaving work. But phone records and witness statements told a different story. His cell phone pinged in locations inconsistent with his version of events, even placing him near areas later searched for Hailey. As weeks turned into months, the case took dramatic twists. Polygraph tests, search warrants, and endless interrogations only added to the murkiness. Sean allegedly failed multiple polygraphs, though those results were never officially confirmed. In one interview, he even admitted to having violent fantasies, including thoughts of killing. It was enough to keep investigators' focus firmly on him. Meanwhile, Billie Jean Dunn's actions continued to baffle both law enforcement and the public. Her relationship with Sean remained intact, despite the suspicion surrounding him. She defended him on national television, saying she believed he had nothing to do with Hailey's disappearance. But this loyalty only fueled speculation. Why stand by a man so many believed was responsible? Searches expanded far beyond Colorado City. Helicopters, canine units, and hundreds of volunteers combed the fields, rivers, and back roads of West Texas. But with every passing day, hope faded. In March 2013, more than 2 years after Hailey vanished, a grim discovery was made. A badly decomposed body was found near Lake J.B. Thomas, about 20 miles from Hailey's home. Dental records later confirmed what many had feared. It was Hailey Dunn. The revelation devastated her family and community. After years of searching, their worst nightmare had come true. Yet, even with Hailey's body recovered, justice seemed as far away as ever. Investigators continued to circle around Sean Adkins. The circumstantial evidence against him was overwhelming, but prosecutors hesitated to press charges without something concrete tying him to Hailey's death. The case stalled, growing colder with each year that passed. But Hailey's father, Clint Dunn, refused to give up. He became the face of the fight for justice, appearing on television, speaking to media, and demanding accountability. He pushed for answers, for someone to be held responsible for what happened to his daughter. Finally, after more than a decade of waiting, there was a breakthrough. In 2021, Sean Adkins was arrested and charged with the murder of Hailey Dunn. For many, it was a long overdue development. The man suspected from the very beginning was finally facing the consequences. Yet, even in custody, Adkins maintained his innocence. He claimed he had nothing to do with Hailey's disappearance or death. But prosecutors argued otherwise, citing years of evidence, lies, and inconsistencies that pointed directly at him. The case, once cold and nearly forgotten, was back in the headlines. And while Hailey's family could never truly heal from the loss, there was finally a glimmer of justice. Hailey Dunn's story is one of tragedy, heartbreak, and resilience. A young girl's life was cut short, but her memory lived on through the relentless determination of those who loved her, especially her father, who refused to let her case fade into silence. Today, as new details continue to emerge from previously sealed files, one truth remains. Hailey Dunn's name will never be forgotten. Her story stands as a haunting reminder of the dangers that can hide in plain sight and the strength it takes to fight for justice, no matter how long it takes.
I love her with all my heart, and I just wish for her safe return. While media attention focused on television interviews and tabloid drama, Hailey's father, Clint Dunn, was relentless. He searched fields, knocked on doors, and called anyone who might help. He contacted detectives, reporters, even private investigators, pleading with them to not let his daughter's case fade into silence. Clint believed, deep down, that both Billie Jean Dunn and Sean Adkins knew more than they were admitting. Behind closed doors, the picture of the Dunn household was far from peaceful. Police records later revealed a troubling history of domestic disputes between Billie and Sean. In one call months before Hailey vanished, both accused the other of making threats. Officers described the pair as volatile, argumentative, and unstable. Neighbors weren't surprised. They'd heard the shouting through thin walls, watched arguments spill out into the yard, and whispered about the chaos on Chestnut Street. For many, it wasn't a home at all. It was a ticking time bomb. But the most disturbing details didn't come from adults. They came from Hailey herself. Friends and relatives recalled the things Hailey used to say about Sean. She didn't like him. She didn't trust him. She was afraid of him. Her grandmother, Connie, remembered Hailey telling her that she sometimes saw Sean's shadow outside her bedroom door late at night, just standing there. Friends said she often tried to avoid being alone with him. Billie would later claim Hailey and Sean were more like friends. But to those who knew Hailey best, her fear was unmistakable. When investigators dug deeper, Sean's story began to unravel almost immediately. He originally claimed that on the morning of December 27th, he went to work at a Snyder manufacturing plant, only to be fired. He said he clocked in, grabbed a drink, and was dismissed, turning in his uniform on the spot. But his supervisor told a very different story. Sean hadn't been fired at all. He had quit voluntarily. This detail, seemingly minor, exposed his first lie. When confronted, Sean admitted he had fabricated the story to avoid conflict with Billie Jean, saying he didn't want her to know he'd walked away from a steady job. To detectives, this was a red flag. Cell phone data painted an even more troubling picture. Sean insisted he left work and drove straight to his mother's home in Big Spring, 50 miles away, to use her computer to file for unemployment. But phone records told another story. Between 6:35 a.m. and 6:56 p.m., his phone pinged cell towers in Colorado City, the very town where Hailey lived. If he had truly gone straight to Big Spring, the towers along the route would have shown it. Instead, it looked as though he remained near Colorado City during a critical window when Hailey was last seen alive. Hours later, between 9:38 a.m. and 2:40 p.m., his phone finally pinged in Big Spring. That left nearly 3 hours unaccounted for, a gap investigators couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, Hailey's older brother David came home from work around 4 p.m. The front door was locked, so he crawled in through a window. Inside, he was startled to find Sean standing in the hallway, looking like, in David's words, a deer in the headlights. Other relatives recalled Sean making chilling remarks. When asked how anyone could harm an innocent child, he allegedly replied, "It's like killing a deer." That evening, records show Sean picked up Billie from work. Together, they withdrew $140 from 2 ATMs. Billie claimed the money went toward groceries and gas. Investigators later determined it was spent on narcotics. This raised a new concern. Not only were children living in the home with drugs present, but both adults were also lying to police. When asked to take polygraph tests, both failed. Billie admitted she was on anti-anxiety medication, which could have influenced the results. Sean refused the test twice, and then on the third attempt answered just 2 questions. Where might Hailey be? Scurry County. Who should investigators look at? Both of us. The polygraph examiner flagged both answers as truthful, but Sean refused to elaborate, got up, and walked out once again.
Detectives then uncovered something even darker. While searching the property, they found hundreds of printed articles about serial killers, sectional sadism, and family violence, carefully saved and organized. When asked, Billie dismissed it, saying she and Sean were simply true crime fans. Investigators weren't convinced. By January 12, 2011, just 2 weeks after Hailey disappeared, authorities officially named Sean Adkins a person of interest. The community wasn't surprised. Then came another devastating blow. On February 24th, Child Protective Services intervened. Hailey's older brother David was removed from the home. CPS rarely acts without cause, and in this case, their decision reflected the escalating concerns about Billy and Sean's household. But what investigators uncovered next was even more damning. During forensic analysis of computers and devices linked to both homes, authorities found more than 100,000 images of child sexual abuse material. Some were located on a memory stick inside Billy's house. Others were found on a computer at Sean's mother's home. And then came a baffling twist. Among the seized devices was a laptop believed to be critical to the case. Yet not long after it was confiscated, Sean's stepfather stormed into the police station demanding it be returned. Shockingly, authorities gave it back. For many, this was a catastrophic mistake. Why return potential evidence to the prime suspect in a missing child investigation? The decision has haunted both the Dunn family and those who followed the case closely. Despite the discovery of the illegal material, no arrests were made. Prosecutors explained that because multiple people had access to the devices, Billy, Sean, and his relatives, it was impossible to prove who was responsible beyond a reasonable doubt. But to the community, this explanation rang hollow. Meanwhile, Billy's actions continued to raise eyebrows. She lied to investigators about Sean's whereabouts, and in March 2011, she was arrested, not for Hailey's disappearance, but for giving false statements during an active investigation. Instead of cutting ties with Sean, Billy stayed by his side. After receiving probation, she shockingly chose to move with him to Travis County. They continued their relationship into 2012, even as suspicion mounted. And still, there was no sign of Hailey. For Clint Dunn, every day was torture. He searched, prayed, and held on to hope, even as the years dragged on. Then, in March 2013, nearly 2.5 years after Hailey vanished, everything changed. A hiker near Lake J.B. Thomas in Scurry County stumbled across human remains. Hidden in brush, weathered by time and the elements, they were just 20 miles from where Hailey had last been seen. Search teams descended on the area. What they found was heartbreaking. The remains were so decomposed that identification would take time. But deep down, everyone feared the truth. For weeks, forensic experts worked to confirm what everyone feared. On April 26, 2013, the announcement came. The remains found near Lake J.B. Thomas were those of 13-year-old Hailey Darlene Dunn. DNA analysis by the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification left no doubt. For her family, the news landed like a thunderclap. The faint hope that Hailey might be alive was extinguished. Clint Dunn was quietly told she likely died from blunt force trauma, but no official cause of death was ever released. Authorities stayed tight-lipped, leaving the public with more questions than answers. The mystery of where Hailey was had ended. The mystery of how and why she died was only deepening. From 2013 to 2017, the case stagnated. No arrests, no new suspects, just silence. It wasn't until 4 years later that Hailey's family finally laid her to rest. Even then, closure was impossible. Clint Dunn refused to let his daughter's memory fade. He organized vigils, built awareness on social media, and confronted law enforcement with demands for answers. His grief hardened into determination, a force that would eventually crack open the case once again. In 2019, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A former middle school student recalled finding items belonging to Hailey in the months after her disappearance. Items later confirmed to be hers. The most disturbing part, they were discovered in an area that had already been searched multiple times by law enforcement. Had investigators been careless? Or had the evidence been planted later? For Clint, it was both hope and torment. If these items had been collected back in 2011, maybe justice would not have taken nearly a decade.
As the investigation stirred back to life, another thread began unraveling. Across West Texas, women reported being harassed online by a man calling himself Casey, Sean Adkins' middle name. The harassment was not casual. It was graphic, threatening, and relentless. Private investigator Erica Morse took the reports seriously. She traced the digital trail and linked it back to Sean. To her, it revealed who he really was: manipulative, cruel, and capable of violence. But when she presented the evidence, law enforcement dismissed it outright. Victims, and Morse herself, were accused of fabricating the claims. Still, by 2021, momentum was finally building. The inconsistencies in Sean's alibi, the disturbing online behavior, the overlooked evidence, it was all converging. Behind the scenes, the Texas Rangers and Mitchell County prosecutors were taking another hard look. On June 14, 2021, the breakthrough came. In Big Spring, Texas, Sean Adkins was arrested and charged with the murder of Hailey Dunn. The images spread quickly. Sean in handcuffs, shackled, flanked by officers. After nearly a decade, the man long suspected was finally behind bars. His bond was set at $2 million. For Clint Dunn, it was bittersweet. The man he had always believed responsible was in custody, but an arrest didn't equal justice. The community of Colorado City exhaled with cautious relief, yet questions swirled. Why now? What evidence had finally tipped the scales? The affidavit supporting Sean's arrest was sealed under Texas law. Reporters and the public were given only a single page, a warrant stating he was being arrested for murder. No details, no timeline, no forensic evidence. Just a charge. Inside the courtroom, Sean said little. He waived arraignment and entered no plea. Outside, Clint called it a breakthrough. There are no words to define how I feel. We will let the child speak the truth. But prosecutors admitted privately they were still missing the critical link, a piece of forensic evidence that could hold up in court. They had circumstantial evidence, contradictions, and suspicion, but not the airtight proof needed to convict. 2 years later, in June 2023, the case collapsed. Prosecutors dismissed the charges without prejudice, meaning they could refile later. After 2 years in custody, Sean Adkins walked free. For Clint, it was another crushing blow. But he refused to be silent. If anything, he grew louder. He openly accused both Sean and Billie Jean Dunn of being involved in Hailey's death. They're both involved. That's not even up for discussion anymore. By then, Billie had distanced herself from Sean. Their relationship had ended years earlier, weighed down by failed polygraphs, disturbing evidence in their home, and public suspicion. She later claimed she wasn't surprised by his arrest, even thanking God someone was finally being held accountable. Yet, she was never named a suspect. By early 2025, the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit officially took over Hailey's investigation. With advanced forensic tools and a fresh set of eyes, there is renewed hope that what was missed before might now be uncovered. A Crime Stoppers reward of $3,000 remains active for information leading to a conviction. For the people of Colorado City, the case is a haunting mix of dread and hope. A community scarred, a family still waiting, and a question that has echoed for more than a decade. Who killed Hailey Dunn? They had lived through this before. Arrests, headlines, promises of progress, only to watch it all fade back into silence. Hailey Dunn's case revealed how years of searching can still leave behind unanswered questions, conflicting accounts, missing evidence, and unresolved grief. That same uncertainty reaches far beyond Colorado City. Now we shift to the case of Mike Mansholt, a 17-year-old from Germany whose disappearance has haunted his family and baffled investigators for years. Mike was a healthy teenager, weighing somewhere between 145 and 170 pounds,
Yet when his body was discovered, it weighed only 35 pounds. Almost all of his internal organs were gone: his heart, brain, lungs, liver, pancreas, stomach, bladder, and small intestine. What left authorities and his family in disbelief was that his body bore no signs of being cut open or torn apart, making it difficult to accept that animals could have caused this. The question remains, what truly happened to Mike Mansholt? You might ask how such a young man ended up traveling abroad alone. The answer lies in his adventurous spirit. Mike was no stranger to travel. He had explored much of the world since childhood. Born on August 20th, 1998, in Oldenburg, Germany, a city of over 160,000 people, Mike was raised by his parents, Bernd and Suzanne Mansholt. After their divorce, both moved on to new partners. Mike lived with his mother, who later had a daughter named Maria, while his father also welcomed a son named Daniel. Despite these family changes, Mike enjoyed a good relationship with his half-siblings and loved having them in his life. From early on, Mike had a passion for adventure. He inherited this from his father, who once took him on a voyage across the Atlantic Ocean by sailboat, a journey that lasted over 700 days. Together, they also traveled to Iceland, Scotland, the Caribbean, and more. Bernd described his son as kind, polite, and calm, even though he was naturally curious and eager to discover the world. In July 2016, 17-year-old Mike set out on his very first solo trip. His destination? Malta, a beautiful island nation in the Mediterranean Sea, located just 58 miles south of Sicily, Italy. With a population of around 500,000 and covering just over 120 square miles, Malta is a popular summer destination, known for its warm weather, beaches, and relatively low crime rate. Mike's reason for traveling there was personal. His girlfriend was attending a language course on the island, and he was excited to see her.
The two reunited on July 8, 2016, when Mike landed in Malta. Without wasting any time, he headed to Valletta, the capital city, where she was waiting. The reunion was full of joy. They spent the following days exploring, laughing, and enjoying the island together. They strolled through vibrant streets, relaxed on golden beaches, tasted local foods, and admired Malta's rich history. It was the kind of trip that felt magical, an experience destined to be remembered. But when the time came for his girlfriend to return to Germany, Mike made a different decision. He realized he wasn't ready to leave. He had fallen in love with Malta itself and wanted to explore further, meet new people, and continue the adventure on his own. So, after saying goodbye to his girlfriend, he told his parents that he planned to stay a few more days. Back home, Suzanne was in Germany, while Bernd was on vacation in Croatia with family. Neither of them objected. Mike was responsible, independent, and experienced with travel. Extending his stay seemed perfectly safe. They trusted him completely. As mentioned, Mike wasn't like most teenagers. From a young age, he had traveled extensively, seeing nearly every corner of the world. His parents often remarked on how unusually mature he was for his age. Calm, independent, and resourceful, Mike carried himself with a quiet confidence that set him apart. He could handle situations that would overwhelm many adults. So, when he said he wanted to extend his stay in Malta, his parents didn't hesitate. They believed in him. After his girlfriend returned to Germany, Mike was eager to discover the island in his own way, solo, spontaneous, and unfiltered. He checked into a hotel in Sliema, a bustling coastal city on Malta's northeastern shore. Sliema is well known for its lively streets filled with tourists, stylish cafes, restaurants, and boutiques. It's the most densely populated city in Malta, buzzing with energy at all hours. He booked a room at the Ostro Hotel, a popular spot among solo travelers. It wasn't luxurious, but it offered everything he needed: a clean room, reliable Wi-Fi, and a view of the Mediterranean Sea. For a young adventurer, it was the perfect base to explore the island freely.
On the morning of July 18th, everything seemed normal, or so it appeared. Hotel surveillance showed Mike leaving room 105 at exactly 8:39 a.m. He looked relaxed and casual, just starting another day. At 9:10 a.m., he was seen again at the reception desk, chatting briefly with staff. He asked a few simple questions, likely about bike rentals or local attractions. Smiling and polite, he carried the same easygoing demeanor everyone knew him for. After a short exchange, he went back upstairs. He stayed in his room for an hour. Then, at 9:55 a.m., cameras captured him leaving room 105 once more. That would be the last confirmed sighting of Mike. In the footage, he wore a blue t-shirt, carried a black backpack slung over one shoulder, and held his phone. He looked prepared for another day of exploring Malta under the bright summer sun. Inside his backpack were the essentials: his GoPro camera, a portable charger, ID, credit card, and some cash. Just enough for a day trip. The weather was perfect, with clear skies and warm sunshine, ideal for exploring hidden corners of the island. From there, Mike made his way to a nearby port where he rented a mountain bike. It was a blue and black Lombardo, sturdy and well-suited for off-road riding. At exactly 10:11 a.m., he sent his dad a voice message on WhatsApp. His tone was upbeat and relaxed as he described renting the bike and his plan to cycle around the island. He mentioned the steep hills, joking that he might have to push the bike in some places. He even promised to send him a picture soon. But that picture never arrived. That short message was the last anyone ever heard from Mike. For the next couple of days, silence. At first, no one was alarmed. Mike had always been the kind of person who enjoyed disconnecting, immersing himself in the moment and exploring independently. It wasn't unusual for him to go quiet for a while. But everything changed on July 22nd, the day Mike was supposed to return home. His mother, Suzanne, and his sister, Maria, went to the airport to meet him. Standing at the arrivals gate, they scanned the crowd, waiting for him to appear with his backpack and a big smile. But Mike never came through those doors. At first, they assumed he might have landed in Frankfurt instead, as sometimes happened with connecting flights. But when Suzanne tried calling his phone, it went straight to voicemail. She dialed again and again, hoping it would ring. But each time, the result was the same: silence. Her instincts told her something was terribly wrong. She contacted the airline for answers, and what she learned confirmed her fears. Mike had never boarded the plane. He had missed the flight entirely. That was the moment panic took hold.
Suzanne went straight to the police, filing a missing person report in the early hours of July 23. Authorities took it seriously right away, launching a full investigation and working alongside Maltese police. As Suzanne tried to process what was happening, she was hit with another shock. A German detective assigned to the case relayed word from Malta. The local authorities had actually been searching for Mike for several days already. He had gone missing back on July 18th, the same day he rented the mountain bike. Mike never returned the bike, which was due back the following day, and he also failed to check out of the Astra Hotel or collect his belongings. Concerned, the hotel manager reported his disappearance to the Maltese police on July 20. While a search had already begun in Malta, his family in Germany had been left completely in the dark. No one from Maltese authorities had contacted them. Some claimed they didn't have the family's contact details. Others believed it was sheer negligence. When Mike's father Bernd found out, he was blindsided. Wasting no time, he cut his vacation short, grabbed Mike's brother Daniel, and flew straight to Malta. Though panic loomed, Bernd tried to remain level-headed, hoping Mike had simply missed his flight, lost his phone, or gotten sidetracked. The family clung to hope, believing he would turn up soon. But one thing gnawed at Bernd. Mike's phone had been switched off, and there was no trace of him anywhere. Bernd stayed in constant contact with investigators and even joined the search. Police scoured every part of Malta, checking ferries and small aircraft, while missing posters with Mike's face went up across the island. On July 24, Interpol became involved, turning the search international with cooperation between German and Maltese authorities. Then came July 26th.
8 days after Mike vanished. Maltese police received an anonymous tip. The caller reported that Mike had last been seen near Dingley Cliffs, a tourist hotspot that towers 820 feet above the sea. The man who had rented Mike the mountain bike also mentioned that Mike had talked about visiting the nearby Rabat catacombs, making it likely he had passed through the cliffs area. A full-scale search team was dispatched. Sniffer dogs, paramedics, and firefighters joined the operation. Bernd and Daniel rushed to the scene as well. By the time they arrived, reporters were already swarming the site, pressing for answers. Not long after, search dogs picked up a scent. Hours later, the nightmare became reality. Mike's body was discovered at the base of the cliffs, hidden among bushes in a rocky section. The mountain bike he had rented was found 98 feet higher up, smashed. Investigators sent Mike's remains for autopsy while his sneakers and sunglasses were recovered nearby. Strangely, Mike was barefoot. His backpack, which contained his phone, laptop, GoPro, money, and credit cards, was missing entirely. Adding to the mystery, fresh hay was found near his body, as though someone had stepped there and left traces behind. It couldn't have been Mike. He was barefoot, and his shoes were several feet away. When investigators asked a local farmer about the hay, he denied knowing anything. But Bernd wasn't convinced. After speaking with the farmer, he felt something was off. The man seemed nervous, almost evasive, repeating that he knew nothing about the backpack or any unusual activity. Bernd's heart was shattered, but he refused to let grief consume him. He was determined to uncover the truth. Daniel, however, was devastated. He and Mike had been unusually close for half-brothers, inseparable and full of plans to travel the world together. Now those dreams were gone. Through tears, Daniel described Mike as a strong, adventurous young man who loved chasing challenges and had simply come to Malta to enjoy its beauty, plans that would never be fulfilled. When Suzanne received the news of Mike's death, it felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. The thought of losing her son was unbearable. His sister Maria was also crushed. Their bond had been irreplaceable, and now she had lost her brother forever. Mike's girlfriend waiting in Germany for his return was left heartbroken. She had counted down the days until they'd be reunited, imagining their future together, but it all vanished in an instant. The tragedy didn't just shock Malta. It made headlines around the world. With Malta's reputation as a safe country, a case like this was almost unheard of. News spread quickly through Malta and Germany, grabbing global attention. And as investigators dug deeper, even more bizarre details began to emerge. Mike had been passionate about documenting his adventures, always filming and recording. That's why his missing GoPro was so important. If it contained footage from his final day, it could hold vital clues. But when his body was found, only 3 items were recovered: his sneakers, his sunglasses, and the empty GoPro case. The case was attached to his belt, but the camera itself was missing. The first thing Bernd asked when he arrived in Malta was about the GoPro. The lead investigator told him she had seen the GoPro case attached to Mike's belt and confirmed it had been logged into evidence. When Bernd went back to the Astra Hotel to collect Mike's belongings, everything was returned except for the GoPro case. Something didn't make sense. Bernd was convinced Mike had taken the case with him and that the missing camera, possibly containing critical footage, could hold the truth about what happened. But the very next day, things became even more baffling. Every officer involved in the case suddenly denied ever seeing the GoPro case. They insisted no such item had been collected. Bernd was stunned. How could they deny it when the lead investigator herself had earlier confirmed it? Yet when confronted, she repeated the same story. There was no case. Something was clearly off. Then, before the family could process it all, police issued a public statement declaring Mike's death an accident. According to them, he had fallen from the cliffs while riding his bike. But the way his body had been discovered didn't match that version. If he'd fallen while cycling, logic suggested he would have landed forward. Instead, his position indicated he had fallen backward, something nearly impossible in a simple accident. Despite the contradictions, police quickly closed the file, claiming Mike had fallen more than 30 meters and somehow rolled to where his body was eventually found. Adding to the confusion, the coroner told Bernd that Mike hadn't suffered because he'd broken his neck in 2 places, causing near-instant death. But at that time, no x-rays had been conducted. How could such a claim be made without evidence? Was it just a guess? A month later, the autopsy report was finally released. It confirmed through DNA testing that the body was indeed Mike's. It also stated he had been dead for about 8 days when discovered, meaning he likely died the very same day he left the hotel. But one detail stood out above all. The autopsy showed not a single broken bone. None. This was highly suspicious, since a fall from over 98 feet should have caused at least some fractures. This revelation only deepened Burnt's doubts, and things became stranger when investigators examined Mike's rented bike. The damage to it didn't match the kind of destruction expected from a fall of nearly 100 feet. Piece by piece, the story was falling apart. Then, just before the official autopsy results were finalized, a morgue employee quietly approached Burnt. She confessed that everything about Mike's death seemed suspicious. The absence of broken bones completely contradicted the official story. She warned him that authorities seemed uninterested in pushing the case further and urged him to consider his next steps carefully. Determined to get answers, Burnt tried to speak again with the head investigator, the same officer who had once claimed to see the GoPro case, only to later deny it. This time, she refused to engage with him, brushing off his questions as though the matter wasn't worth her time. Burnt's suspicions only grew. Why was the case being handled so carelessly? Why were the simplest facts being denied? Burnt continued pressing about the missing GoPro, certain it was the key. Days later, the Maltese Forensic Department finally handed him a camera, claiming it belonged to Mike. But instead of the GoPro Hero 2 Mike had been using, they gave him an old Canon model from the early digital era. Along with it came a memory card, completely destroyed. They insisted it had been recovered near Mike's body. Burnt immediately recognized it wasn't his son's camera. Authorities seemed to be trying to pass off outdated equipment as Mike's, hoping to silence his questions about the real GoPro. By this point, Mike's family was deeply suspicious of the Maltese police. Between the inconsistencies, the lack of progress, and the strange handling of evidence, trust was gone. When Burnt asked about the theft of Mike's belongings, officers dismissively suggested no Maltese citizen would take items from a body, hinting instead that it could have been a tourist. And then there were the phone records. Investigators claimed they had checked Mike's phone data, but found absolutely nothing. No location pings, no activity, nothing. Once again, answers led nowhere. Frustrated and convinced that the truth was being covered up, Burnt prepared to accuse the authorities outright. But before he could take any action, he had to return to Germany to arrange Mike's funeral and face the crushing grief of laying his son to rest. Mike's body arrived in Germany on August 17, 2016. What should have been a time of mourning quickly turned into something out of a crime documentary. Funeral home staff tasked with preparing the body were horrified. Mike's body appeared deflated, as if all the air had been drained from him. Something was terribly wrong. Even more shocking, his body hadn't been embalmed, an unusual detail given that the case was still under investigation. Instead of the chemical scent of preservation, the coffin carried the unmistakable odor of decomposition. Alarmed, the funeral staff immediately contacted police. One officer even mentioned that airport staff had commented on how strangely light the coffin felt. Mike's remains were quickly sent to the Medical University of Hanover. What doctors discovered there was horrifying. His body weighed only 16 kilograms, about 35 pounds. Almost all of his internal organs were missing. His brain, heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, adrenal glands, right kidney, bladder, stomach, and intestines were all gone. Only fragments of his left kidney, diaphragm, spleen, and colon remained. This explained why his body had looked so deflated. He had been reduced to little more than an empty shell. Yes, organs are sometimes removed during autopsies, but they are typically either returned to the body or replaced with fillers such as cotton or sawdust. And if they are not returned, there should be a full report documenting why. In Mike's case, none of that was done.
No explanation, no documentation, no respect.
Mike's family was shattered. His father, Byrne, wrote a desperate and heartfelt letter to the Maltese authorities, pleading for his son's missing organs to be returned so he could finally lay him to rest with dignity. The reply he received was nothing short of shocking. The coroner claimed that animals had eaten the organs before Mike's body was discovered. But this explanation made no sense. The original Maltese autopsy had never mentioned animal bites, claw marks, or any indication of scavenging. The story didn't hold up. That's when the German authorities stepped in. What had once been written off as a tragic accident now began to look far more sinister. They launched a full investigation. The forensic experts in Hanover immediately requested a copy of the original Maltese autopsy report, but it never arrived. And without Mike's organs, their second autopsy was already compromised. Still, Byrne and Suzanne refused to back down. They filed a formal complaint and demanded answers. Through their lawyer, they uncovered yet another shocking twist, an email from the Maltese coroner himself. In it, he now claimed rodents had eaten Mike's organs and that his brain had liquefied. For Mike's parents, this was the last straw. They took their fight to court, and soon German prosecutors began leaning toward a darker possibility. What if Mike hadn't simply died in an accident? What if he had been murdered? The German side also accused the Maltese forensic team of gross negligence. A fresh autopsy was ordered, though Mike's body had already deteriorated severely. This time, Maltese officials were required to attend so there could be no twisting of the results. Once again, the findings were deeply disturbing. There were no bite marks or evidence of rodents, only a tiny nibble on the neck and a faint scratch on the forearm. Clearly not enough to explain why his organs were missing. And importantly, it was reaffirmed that Mike's body had been fully intact when it was first recovered from beneath the cliffs and brought to the morgue in Malta. The new autopsy also revealed one of the biggest failures of all. Mike had never been embalmed. Because of that, his body decomposed far more rapidly, destroying crucial evidence that might have explained how he died. Even worse, nothing in the forensic findings supported Malta's version of events, that Mike had fallen off a cliff. The story simply didn't match the science. Despite all of this, the Maltese authorities doubled down. They insisted Mike's death was the result of a tragic fall. The first autopsy carried out by Malta's forensic team included 3 people, among them Dr. Mario, Malta's chief forensic doctor, who personally attended the body's recovery and performed the examination himself. But when Mike's parents and journalists pressed him for answers, Dr. Mario was unusually silent. He replied only once to Byrne, Mike's father, in an email stating that the organs were already missing before the autopsy and suggesting rodents were to blame. He also claimed that Mike's brain had dissolved under the summer heat. The German forensic team rejected these claims outright. They confirmed that no bite marks existed to support the rodent theory. And as for the idea of a brain dissolving in the sun, they dismissed it as absurd. Countries around the world endorse summer temperatures well above 40 degrees Celsius, yet no such phenomenon has ever been documented. There were more problems with Dr. Mario's account. He had written in his report that Mike's body was found lying on his back, but the German team believed he had not died at the spot where he was discovered. Their theory suggested that Mike might have still been alive when he reached the beach and possibly crawled into the shade beneath the cliff. They even considered asphyxiation as a cause of death, pointing out one chilling fact. Mike's hyoid bone, the small bone in the neck often fractured in cases of strangulation, was missing. By November 2017, Byrne's patience had run out. He returned to Malta, determined to confront the police and detectives who had handled his son's case. But once again, they refused to cooperate. Mike's family was devastated. His father, Byrne, wrote a desperate and heartfelt letter to the Maltese authorities, pleading for his son's missing organs to be returned so he could finally lay him to rest with dignity. The reply he received was nothing short of shocking. The coroner
claimed that animals had eaten the organs before Mike's body was discovered. But this explanation made no sense. The original Maltese autopsy had never mentioned animal bites, claw marks, or any indication of scavenging. The story didn't hold up. That's when the German authorities stepped in. What had once been written off as a tragic accident now began to look far more sinister. They launched a full investigation. The forensic experts in Hanover immediately requested a copy of the original Maltese autopsy report, but it never arrived. And without Mike's organs, their second autopsy was already compromised. Still, Byrne and Suzanne refused to back down. They filed a formal complaint and demanded answers. Through their lawyer, they uncovered yet another shocking twist. An email from the Maltese coroner himself. In it, he now claimed rodents had eaten Mike's organs and that his brain had liquefied. For Mike's parents, this was the last straw. They took their fight to court, and soon German prosecutors began leaning toward a darker possibility. What if Mike hadn't simply died in an accident? What if he had been murdered? The German side also accused the Maltese forensic team of gross negligence. A fresh autopsy was ordered, though Mike's body had already deteriorated severely. This time, Maltese officials were required to attend so there could be no twisting of the results. Once again, the findings were deeply disturbing. There were no bite marks or evidence of rodents, only a tiny nibble on the neck and a faint scratch on the forearm. Clearly not enough to explain why his organs were missing. And importantly, it was reaffirmed that Mike's body had been fully intact when it was first recovered from beneath the cliffs and brought to the morgue in Malta. The new autopsy also revealed one of the biggest failures of all. Mike had never been embalmed. Because of that, his body decomposed far more rapidly, destroying crucial evidence that might have explained how he died. Even worse, nothing in the forensic findings supported Malta's version of events, that Mike had fallen off a cliff. The story simply didn't match the science. Despite all of this, the Maltese authorities doubled down. They insisted Mike's death was the result of a tragic fall. The first autopsy carried out by Malta's forensic team included 3 people, among them Dr. Mario, Malta's chief forensic doctor, who personally attended the body's recovery and performed the examination himself. But when Mike's parents and journalists pressed him for answers, Dr. Mario was unusually silent. He replied only once to Byrne, Mike's father, in an email stating that the organs were already missing before the autopsy and suggesting rodents were to blame. He also claimed that Mike's brain had dissolved under the summer heat. The German forensic team rejected these claims outright. They confirmed that no bite marks existed to support the rodent theory. And as for the idea of a brain dissolving in the sun, they dismissed it as absurd. Countries around the world endorse summer temperatures well above 40 degrees Celsius, yet no such phenomenon has ever been documented. There were more problems with Dr. Mario's account. He had written in his report that Mike's body was found lying on his back, but the German team believed he had not died at the spot where he was discovered. Their theory suggested that Mike might have still been alive when he reached the beach and possibly crawled into the shade beneath the cliff. They even considered asphyxiation as a cause of death, pointing out one chilling fact. Mike's hyoid bone, the small bone in the neck often fractured in cases of strangulation, was missing. By November 2017, Byrne's patience had run out. He returned to Malta, determined to confront the police and detectives who had handled his son's case. But once again, they refused to cooperate.
Mike's family was devastated. His father, Byrne, wrote an emotional letter to the Maltese authorities pleading for his son's missing organs to be returned so he could finally lay him to rest with dignity. The response he received was shocking. The coroner claimed that animals had eaten the organs before Mike's body was discovered, but this explanation made no sense at all. The original Maltese autopsy made no mention of animal bites, claw marks, or chewed skin. Nothing to support that claim. That's when the German authorities stepped in. What had once seemed like a tragic accident was now beginning to look like a potential crime.
They launched a full investigation. The forensic team in Hanover requested a copy of Malta's original autopsy report, but it never arrived. And without Mike's organs, their own second autopsy was already limited. Still, Byrne and Suzanne refused to give up. They filed a formal complaint and pushed for answers. Through their lawyer, they uncovered an email from the Maltese coroner with yet another story. This time, he claimed rodents had eaten the organs and that Mike's brain had liquefied. For the parents, this excuse was the final straw. They took their fight to court, and German prosecutors began leaning toward a far darker theory. What if Mike had been murdered? They also criticized the Maltese coroners for their sloppy work. A fresh autopsy was ordered, even though Mike's body had already deteriorated badly. This time, Maltese officials were required to attend so there could be no distortion of the facts. Once again, the results were troubling. There were no bite marks, no evidence of rodent activity, just a small nibble on the neck and a faint scratch on the forearm, nowhere near enough to explain the missing organs. It was also confirmed that Mike's body had been fully intact when recovered from beneath the cliffs and transported to the Maltese morgue. The new autopsy revealed what might have been the most critical failure of all. Mike had never been embalmed. Because of that, his body decomposed too quickly, destroying evidence that might have explained his death. Even worse, nothing supported the claim that Mike had died from falling off a cliff. The official story simply didn't match the forensic findings. What started as a simple case of a missing man found dead had now become a full-blown mystery. Yet the Maltese authorities stuck to their version of events, insisting Mike's death was caused by a tragic fall. The first autopsy, carried out by Malta's forensic team, included 3 people, among them Dr. Mario, the country's chief forensic doctor. Dr. Mario, who had a respected reputation, was present when the body was recovered and personally conducted the autopsy. But when Mike's parents and journalists pressed for more details, he was unusually silent. He replied only once to Mike's father Byrne in an email, claiming the organs were already missing before the autopsy and again suggesting rodents were to blame. He also stated that Mike's brain had dissolved from the summer heat. Dr. Mario claimed he had shared this information with the lead investigator, but the German forensic experts weren't convinced. They quickly dismissed the rodent explanation since there were no bite marks on the body. As for the claim about the brain dissolving in the sun, they called it absurd. Many countries experience summer temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius, and nothing like that has ever been reported. There were further problems with Dr. Mario's account. He documented that Mike's body was found lying on his back, but the German team doubted he had died where he was discovered. They theorized that Mike could have still been alive when he reached the beach and might have crawled to a shaded spot under the cliff. They even considered asphyxiation as a possible cause of death, noting that Mike's hyoid bone, a bone often fractured in cases of strangulation, was missing. By November 2017, Byrne had reached his breaking point. He returned to Malta, determined to speak directly with the police and detectives who had handled his son's case. But once again, they refused to cooperate.
Byrne then filed a legal request to access all of the case files, but was told the presiding judge was ill and known for being notoriously slow with judicial approvals. Eventually, through the help of a German diplomat in Malta, he managed to gain access. However, when he reviewed the documents, several crucial items were missing. The autopsy report and the crime scene photographs had mysteriously vanished. By January 2018, under mounting pressure from German authorities, the Maltese government finally agreed to reopen Mike's case. The first set of documents was forwarded to Germany, and soon the German media began covering the story again. It even reached the German parliament, where the case was debated. But despite the renewed attention, the newly assigned judge came to the same conclusion, that Mike's death was the result of a fall from the cliffs. In reality, very little had changed. Although German investigators continued to point out glaring inconsistencies, their efforts stalled due to the lack of evidence. Analysts, ranging from diplomats and journalists to independent observers, remained highly skeptical of the Maltese authorities' official explanation.
Byrne, worn down by years of negligence and stonewalling, finally decided to stop pushing. He redirected his energy toward his family, resigning himself to the painful possibility that the truth about Mike's death might never be known. A German newspaper that had followed the case closely from the start attempted to revisit the story, but when they reached out to Maltese officials, they were met with silence. No one connected to the case was willing to speak, fueling suspicions of a deliberate cover-up. Over time, several theories have circulated. One of the most widely discussed is that Mike may have fallen victim to organ trafficking. As a healthy young man, his missing organs raised troubling questions. According to this theory, he may have been intercepted while cycling through a remote part of Malta, abducted, and taken to a hidden location where his organs were removed. His body, stitched up, could have been dumped off the cliffs to stage the appearance of an accident. Some speculate the Maltese authorities discovered the truth but chose to conceal it, fearing damage to the island's tourism industry. Another theory suggests that Mike was targeted by thieves who stole his belongings and killed him. Some believe he may have been strangled, with his body placed where it was found. If this were the case, authorities might have deliberately removed his hyoid bone, brain, and other organs to obscure evidence of foul play. There's also the possibility that Mike's fall was accidental and opportunistic passers-by simply robbed him afterward. The least supported theory is suicide, which was quickly dismissed since Mike showed no signs of depression and was known to be full of life, plans, and love for his future. To this day, the case of Mike Mansholt remains one of the most mysterious and unresolved in recent memory. The Maltese authorities still stand by their narrative that he tragically fell from the cliffs, while dismissing everything else as conspiracy. But what do you believe? Was Mike's death a terrible accident, or was he the victim of something far more sinister? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you stayed with us until the end, make sure to check out this next video. I think you'll find it just as compelling. Thanks again for watching.